88,888,888. The rift in space and time had become destabilized over the years. Following the arterial roads of Britain and the places where the tectonic plates met, it was a natural part of Earth just as green plants and trees and rock and water. But, just because the rift is naturally occurring, this makes an assumption about nature. Nature isn't always nice. And when the peoples of the earth turned from wandering after their four-legged food and began to plant seedlings and return to find them grown to food, so grew the rift, sending out all manner of fairy folk to inspire legend and fill ghost story. Wanderers became farmers and civilizations built up, houses were built, feudalism, honor to one's lord, became the first form of government and peacekeeping and justice, and the rift was fed with their ideas and knowledge, their hopes and fears. Until one day, it became too unstable. Torchwood was formed, as an independent organization to unite, at the behest of Queen Victoria, to tackle alien life that had a shortcut to planet Earth through this fracture. Behind the rift, Mallory would be easy to find. She was the rift, she had been born there. She had been taken from there. No words passed between Archie and Jack either. Archie, who had drowned his sorrows in much more than 14-year-old scotch, began the travail. After all, he knew way 88,888,888, and, all too soon, Mallory Collier was before them. Or rather, she wasn't. She was everywhere at once. One side, there was a path, moving like a ribbon away from them. The sun was shining, not that it did anything else in the land of the rift. Past them, drove a blowfish in a convertible car. A lone weevil sat on what looked like the edge of a lake and dangling its feet into it. There, Archie pointed, not to his lost love, but to the path, broken before Mallory. There, Jack pointed too, exclaiming the word even more vehemently, when he found the other end. And, who was at the other end? None other than Wren. Jack raced away from Archie and made it to the broken bridge. The woman, a thin vision before them. She looked sad, as if her mind was somewhere else. But then, Jack reminded himself, so did everyone within the world of the rift. A rather unhappy Sontaran was busy watering what looked like a flower bed. But Jack was not interested in anything other than Mallory, and the need to get to her, and help. Different time periods would be rippling outside the rift. Gwen and Reese might not even be the now, or then, or in the future. At the time that baby Roddy came into existence. Roddy first, and then David. Torchwood 4's one-woman band stood on the archway, taffeta dress covering her from neck to ankle. Her stomach swelled. The twins' arrival was imminent. But his eyes were drawn now, not to Mallory, but to her mother. Instinct told Jack that she was trying to get to her daughter, or her daughter was trying to get to her. Wren, he called again, standing below the broken archway. If you can hear me, that's Mallory. Your daughter. Mallory looked down as she heard her name. She gave a half-smile when she saw Jack, and then looked away, as if she, too, were sad. Mallory. Jack called, as he leaned up as far as he could. I am coming up. I need you to do something. It's no good, Mallory told him. The path is for us, only. Can you move it? He called back. Mallory shook her head. You need to join it, and I am here for Roddy, and for David. No, Mallory called back. You have already taken them, see? And Jack did see. For Archie McLeish was no longer standing beside Jack. Instead, cradling two children in his arms, the man was making for the rift, where he would leave this place and return to the world. If he did that, Jack knew, it would make for the biggest implosion the universe had ever known. And there was no point in him running after him. This place did not operate as if it knew the laws of Earth. On Earth, the faster you ran, the quicker you covered your distance. Anything could happen within the rift. And only two people in the world knew how to not control the rift. No one could do that, but harness it. Mallory could do that. So could Wren. Archie is going to take them together, Jack cried, standing directly under the bridge now. The weevil that had been bailing its feet in the lake got to its large, ogress feet and loped across to the river where, with a crumpled face of deep sorrow, rested down by the river and put in his feet. There was a crunch, like a fracture of concrete or ice-cold metal. Jack looked up, ignoring his instinct to fly towards Archie. The bridge was breaking. Both women were about to fall. But, when he looked, Jack could see that neither of them were there anymore. This time, they were on either side of the river, Wren standing square onto Mallory. And this time, Mallory was pregnant again, full term. "Dear Archie," Mallory said to Jack, shaking her head. "He thinks he can end the world with the boys, and that will end his sorrow." "You shifted the timeline?" Jack asked. He was unused to an inherently confident Mallory, who was nodding, with a smile on her face. "I need you, Jack," she told him, "before this place realizes what we are doing." "And what are we doing?" Jack asked her. But then, suddenly, he knew why that was. He could not say. Was it a memory or a future echo? Somewhere, at some time, Mallory and he had worked out the answer. "But it will kill you," Jack told her, shaking his head violently. "What do you plan to do?" "What we planned together to do, Jack," Mallory nodded. "We agreed it, you know this." And the bold truth was that Mallory was right. In that somewhere, sometime, place, they had agreed it. It would negate the need for Torchwood. But then, there was no more Torchwood. It would be a nice touch of symmetry. "How long do we have?" he asked, looking around him. No sign of Archie, yet. Perhaps from his point of view both children were still very much in his arms. "Do it," Mallory ordered. "Help me bring them into the world. I already know they are going to be beautiful." With a quick glance over to Wren, who was standing, as if waiting for her daughter, Jack caught an almost imperceptible nod. It is not as if Torchwood 1's genetic experiment did not know what was going to happen. She had birthed Mallory with Jack's assistance. Wren had remained and Jack had taken her daughter back to her father. An image of Owen crystallized in Jack's mind, replaced shortly by Ianto. At least Owen had known. Ianto had had no time. No time to say goodbye to Jack, no time to consider the future, no time even to breathe and even contemplate the future. There had simply been no time. "Come with me," Mallory urged. And Jack did so, his feet moving as if on their own, as he took Mallory's hands in his own. And then, Mallory was on her back, in her own room at Torchwood 4, transported into the rift in a temporal time bubble. Enough time to deliver Roddy and David, before it either acceded and the plan would have worked, or if you do not do it now, Mallory cried, her labor pains increasing as Roddy began to make a very quick entrance. "Archie will have united the rift, the universe will become destroyed." A very quick entrance. It felt as if there was very little time between the crowning head and the bundle of sticky limbs in Jack's arms. Then he was standing in the living room, Gwen and Reese in front of him. "Take him," Jack insisted, as Roddy, not now a newborn infant, but an 11-year-old boy, stood beside him. "Gwen, you must take his hand and then leave this place." Jack shook his head. "There's going to be one almighty explosion when the temporal time bubble implodes." With not the wit to begin even to ask what Jack meant, Gwen merely nodded. Roddy, looking around the room, nodded when Reese began to stride to the front door. About to step through, Gwen turned back, looking to Jack as he was about to return to the rift. "What about you, Jack?" Gwen called, over her shoulder. Another quake, and Gwen staggered to get her balance. "I will be fine," Jack told her. "Just have to get David now." He shook his head, sadly. After all these years, for the rift to close. "Close? Oh yeah," Jack told her. "Mallory. It is her legacy, as are her sons." "She will be at peace now," Jack added. "She will be free of pain." And then the former head of Torchwood 3 nodded to Mallory and Owen's son. "Look after him." "I will," Gwen told him. "If Reese agrees." "I do," put in Reese. "I have been thinking about this for some time. Adopting Roddy would be an honor, on my part." He smiled a broad smile. Ever since Gwen had told him that Gwen could be their only child, Reese had mourned the son he would never have. But life had given him one anyway, in a roundabout way. He was about to make the most of Roddy Collier. "If you want to." Another shake of Torchwood, and Jack turned, facing the rift, knowing that Archie was still about. He needed to take care. This was not over yet. "Jack," Gwen called, urgently. "You can't possibly go back in there." And then, before her, was the old Jack, the arrogant, smooth-talking boss of hers, flashing her the broad smile that had charmed many a human and alien. "I can't die, remember?" he told them all, and then dropped into the orange glow of the rift line that was running through Mallory Collier's living room. 88,888,888, and now he had to be careful. That Scott, once in charge of Torchwood 2, had, in his grief, taken up his vendetta against the world. Much as Mallory knew how to manipulate the rift, Archie was no second-rater. And he would be angry. Angry people, Jack was well aware, were dangerous people. But he had no choice. He had to get to Mallory, and deliver her of her second son, conceived at a totally different time to Roddy, his and Ianto's child. It should have been no surprise, therefore, that, when Jack Harkness found himself in the rift in a state of total uproar, shouts, screams, of people, creatures unknown were uttering from every dimension. A group of pink-faced aliens that seemed to be made of 2 potatoes and a coat hanger, were charging like savannah wildebeest round the area beyond the river. Broken to smithereens was the bridge. If Mallory and Wren had wanted to cross over it, they would be disappointed. Jack looked at the river again. Was that the place to be? Was Wren there, looking with sorrow over the water to her daughter again? In the chaos and pandemonium, Jack could not tell, and he pulled back as something shot through the air at high speed past his face. It was one of the potato people. He turned and watched as it hit a solid object, and crumpled to the floor. The object turned. It was a Sontaran, whose torso was exposed, as if it had got up from Owen's dissection table and begun to dash. "Hang on a minute." Jack turned, and looked back to the river again. A river, in the rift? How was that possible? He looked once more, and saw, at the edge of it, not one but several weevils lurching along. Hang on. Jack looked once more, at it all, indistinguishable humanoid figures darting about. That had been Archie's speciality, beasts. Especially beasts that were now living amongst the humans, in dark alleys and dim places, coming out only at night. Well, that solved one problem. The mystery as to why the weevils had become so prevalent in Cardiff in Torchwood 3's heyday. Billis had gone back, to cause trouble, perhaps. By the look of the weevils, perhaps was irrelevant. And Owen, on his death, had become their king. It could no longer be a coincidence. A bitter and twisted Archie McLeish had returned in the guise of Billis Manger, and could not help make his rival a tortured monarch to a tortured group of aliens. "Archie!" Jack screamed the name of the boss of Torchwood 2. "Archie, you have me." He turned and addressed another region of the bedlam. "You win, Archie, for what it's worth." "And, is it worth it to you to destroy the entire universe for a lost love? Do trillions of lives have to be lost to prove how unjust this all was?" Was it his own instinct, or had some of the insane noise drifted away? Jack turned, slowly, and Billis stood there. Not the Billis Manger of the Great Devourer, but the Billis who had taken on the mantle once belonging to Archie McLeish. "Oh Jack," Archie called back. "It's all you now, isn't it?" He took some belligerent steps towards him, swaggering with triumph. "The child you are waiting for?" "Ha! To be so ignorant." "I took him, Jack. He is with me now." "And Mallory?" Jack's voice was steady, a complete foil to how he was actually feeling. Mallory was not where he had left her, not by the river, no sign. Find Mallory, and all would be well, Jack told himself, because Archie was lying. If he had David, he would not be here, trying to intimidate him. "Look hard," Jack thought to himself. "Look well. You know you are right, you know that, Jack." Archie's use of his name got inside Jack Harkness's mind, and his memory, of that night, when he had gone to Mallory in all his humility, to meanly ask if she would grant him this one favor. In one timeline, it was done in another, yet to do. Jack just had to find the sweet spot. "Mallory isn't here," Archie called, tauntingly. "And although you cannot die, you can be trapped. And that would be justice, after everything." But it wasn't true. Somehow, Jack could feel it in himself. Because this concerned him, himself, whoever he had been, in that past life. a name unpronounceable in the human tongue of English. Jack Harkness had never loved as he loved that one man. And to do what he had done, to create life from a part of himself and a part of Ianto Jones, was, well, not only risky, but groundbreaking. It could only have been done in the rift. It could only have been done with Mallory around him. Shockwaves, like the death throes of a gigantic, ancient creature, reverberated around him. No words came to Jack's lips, to refute Archie, to declare anything. Around him, creatures, black as night, white as brilliant sunshine, crushed forward and filled the space around him. And still Jack did not move. How long he stood there with the chaos and the destruction, he really could not say. After a time, however, the feeling of not being alone came to Jack like the warmth of an early summer morning. The sound he knew so well. The blue police box shimmered into life, just beyond where Mallory's bridge had been. It was Jack's focus. Which of them would it be, he wondered. 13, as the doctor took on the guise of a woman. 12, that Scott. Hadn't he got one of those already? The life-loving fifth, complete with Turlo and Tegan, standing before him as Jack had in his memory, in a garden repelling a Cyberman attack. Or beloved one, who had guided the TARDIS from Gallifrey, and decided that, having been the cause of so much destruction, that he must use his talents for good. Perhaps it should have been no surprise when the door opened. 13 stepped through first, blonde bob shimmering, no hint of a reaction to the destruction around them. Beside her 12, and then tall 11, wearing his fez, and then 10, whose smile was unparalleled. 9 was next, the Northerner, and then 8 flashed into appearance for a moment. 7 stood, mop-haired with an intense look in his eye as 6 stood to his right, blonde curls topping his tall head. 5 was indeed as Jack remembered, and he wondered which cricket game was missing him. It didn't happen to 4 as usual. The mighty fourth incarnation of the being from Gallifrey had had the wit to tuck in his scarf, and was glaring intently at the chaos as if staring would shame the beasts and the beings into submission. White-haired 3 stood beside the more diminutive, black-haired 2, giving one another scornful glances. And beside 2, 1 stood, noble, stately. Return, demanded 4. His voice clear, commanding. Jack Harkness, you should not be here. You have no power here, reiterated 7. Why have you come? You know why, Jack replied, looking at every version of the Doctor. And it has to be done. Earth can stand this no longer. You were selfish, 9 told him. You thought only of yourself, and not where the consequences lay. I would call it serendipitous, Jack told them. Think of it as an opportunity. We would call it opportunistic, 2 told him, severely. You saw, you conquered, you came. 1 or 2 of the Doctor's forms laughed for a second, before suppressing their own mirth. We can only do what we can do at the time, Jack told them. Unless you can take me back to the exact point where I can be with Mallory, and make this right. Most of the Doctors looked sheepish. It was well known that the TARDIS, as well as taking on the form of a 1950s police box, common in London so that a policeman might contact his station, that its accuracy across space and time was woefully imprecise. She is with Archie McLeish, 7 told him, holding his umbrella handle in both hands and leaning on it. She is happy. Mallory and Archie? Jack felt his stomach fall. He could understand why she liked that consistency. She liked what she knew. But the chances of finding her now, in the right place at the right time, was like looking for a needle in, well, not just one haystack but 100,000 of them around them. Bits of straw flitted through the air. Haystack, Jack repeated. 10 gave 11 a worried glance. Going potty, old thing? 5 asked him. But Jack wasn't. He knew how to find Mallory, and he could do it, he thought, with or without their help. The smile came. All 13 iterations of the Doctor saw it, the slow, arrogant smile belonging to Captain Jack Harkness. Torchwood no longer existed. He had little purpose in any security of the UK. And yet, for all that, they knew he was going to seal the rift. Not attempt, not try, but succeed. Jack Harkness had a plan. All 13 of them, being the one Doctor, knew he was playing them for their inability to resist an adventure. And a just adventure was the thing. Of course, 13 was the one to step forward, the most recent of the Doctor's forms, and spokeswoman for them all, and turned to look back at those who had come before her. "Of course we'll help," she told Jack, "committing every single Doctor to this time, this space. Won't we, boys?"